Exploding Fractal Universes, a DPT trip report by Martel and Irowid. Dose is 80 milligrams, body weight 195 pounds. After a previous disappointing experiment with DPT, I was able to coax the crystals into dissolving better into the injection solution by warming up the solvent, which is 0.9% sodium chloride sterile solution before adding it. I decided to try again using 2 milliliters of the solution, which had a concentration around 40 to 50 milligrams per milliliter at best estimate. The 1 milliliter of solution injected into the left deltoid proved to be fairly uncomfortable, so I switched up and injected the other milliliter into the right deltoid. The DPT was already beginning to come on by the time I injected it into the right arm. Not very noticeably, but enough to make me think I was finished injecting before I'd even started. At about T plus 8 minutes, I noted a strong feeling of onset, consisting of a mild throbbing in the head and general wooziness. I remarked to myself that it reminded me of the onset phase of IM ketamine, only not as fast. The first real effects came in the form of inability to do math, as I was trying to explain to someone how much I had dosed. A few minutes after that, I started noticing that the objects in my room seemed to have ants crawling around under the surface, and the walls looked wavy. Next were deep purple swirly blobs around the outside of my vision that reminded me of watching Milkdrop, the Winamp visualization. The next thing I knew, I was being thrust into some sort of multi-dimensional, brightly colored space. At this point, I was rather dissociated and had no awareness of my surroundings. The bright colors continued to fold inward on themselves, making interesting, non-symmetrical arrangements of triangles, then tetrahedra, and then other shapes. Suddenly, I felt very happy, at great peace with myself and the universe, and felt that I understood what one of my friends had been describing from taking mushrooms. I then felt that I was experiencing every possible experience there ever was and ever would be, all at once. Surprisingly enough, this complete set of experiences seemed to lack any negatives. Perhaps they were there, but I simply counted experiencing them as a positive thing. Sometime later, I came out of this space and found myself back in my room, and reported to him that I knew exactly what he had been talking about. At this point, the room started folding in on itself in a similar fashion as the color space. Particularly distorted was my keyboard, which suddenly felt like it had taken on the shape of a sine wave. I noted that typing was quite difficult and felt like I was having to reach around a corner and do it with my eyes closed. I came under the impression that the distortion was caused by the keyboard existing merely in three-dimensional space. Two-dimensional really, as it had no height, while my body was existing in some sort of hyperdimensional space. So I was in the fourth dimension. A few seconds later, I was thrust into another strange space, but whereas the color space felt like I was experiencing things, this space felt like I was watching everything. At first, the space was quite chaotic. I felt like I was in the middle of a nuclear explosion that continually redetonated. As could be imagined, this was quite unsettling. Perhaps a better analogy would be being tossed about by a series of waterfalls and not being able to get up for air. At some point, I did finally surface enough to note that I had seen something to do with the universe, not in the sense of outer space, but in the sense of the set of everything there is. And that it was presented as fractals, and then I was sucked back under for another round of chaos and repeated the process many times, but each time it seemed to slow down a bit. I was able to stay up for longer in between, and the chaos seemed a little bit less wildly random. After about 2 minutes of this, with every plunge into chaos seeming like an eternity, I realized that the rhythm of my breathing was having a great effect on the trip. The first thing I noticed was that the music I had on, a very nice Ferry Corsten trance set, slowed when I inhaled and sped back up when I exhaled. From there I realized that the sounds of the music seemed linked to my thought patterns. The music had looped sounds that would come in at different intervals, changing the overall sound of it, and the oldest loops would fade out as newer loops faded in. This process gradually changed the entire sound of the music, and I was able to draw a parallel to thinking. We started thinking about something, and then some new thought bumps in and changes the course of the idea. Old thoughts fade in and new thoughts keep coming in, and gradually the whole idea is completely different. Upon gaining this insight, I fell back down into the fractal madness. The next time I surfaced, I realized that the still-slowing fractals represented universes, in the sense of alternate universes, all a part of the over-universe that was the set of everything that is, being born and dying. They started out as tiny points of light in the void, then exploded into full-size universes. then collapsed back in on themselves, then repeated the process. Somehow I was dislodged from my universe, and time was greatly sped up, so I could see the entire universe field being born and dying over and over again. I then had the distinct and eerie feeling that I was being shown this on purpose, that the concept of birth and death of universes was a meme that was somehow trapped in the void and wanted to get loose, wanted people to think it. I likened it to the god of the underworld bound in chains, straining to be released. At the same time, though, the idea was frustratingly difficult to grasp. I saw it as a fish in a pool that I was trying to grab with my bare hands. The fish wanted to be grabbed, but it kept slipping out of my grasp and slipping back down into the darkness. After some time of this, I finally understood what the idea was and felt compelled to share it with everyone I was talking to on IRC, but then ran into the slippery fish again as I attempted to compress the idea down into mere words. At this point, about 35 minutes into the experience, it felt like it had already spanned the whole of time. I started seeing the birth and death of universes in a different analogy, which I was living in. I found this one hard to grasp, but it did lend an understanding to the mechanics of the expansion and collapse. I saw 3 rods on end with rubber string running through the middle of them. The center rod would turn in one direction, wrapping the string around it and stretching it until the string was stretched as far as it would go, unwrapping the string and then wrapping it again the other way. This went on for a while, but as I resigned myself to not understanding the relevance of the illustration to the universes, it switched back to the expanding, contracting fractals. I then felt that there was someone as frustrated with me not understanding the analogies as I was frustrated with people on IRC not understanding my explanations. An online user joined the IRC channel, and I attempted to keep up a bit of friendly banter with him each time I surfaced from the noise of exploding universes. At some point I felt that the cycle was going to continue in a big circle until I understood it. As I resigned myself to not trying to talk with my friend, I spent about 10 real-life minutes observing the cycle and trying to understand it. Every expansion still feels like an eternity, as if I were experiencing the entire content of whichever particular universe I was looking at before it collapsed again. Then I had the insight that the cycle was linked to the rhythm of my breathing. The cycle seemed that much more clear to me then. The universes expanded as I inhaled up to the point where they were life-size at the point right before exhaling, then collapsed again as I exhaled, down to the point where they ceased to exist between breaths. I suddenly understood what I was supposed to learn. Every breath I took contained an infinity of experience, yet they were all the same. Each time the cycle came around, I was just back right where I started. I then felt a different presence, not in the sense that one can feel when someone's looking at you. Simply, I just felt a different sort of intentionality from what was trying to show me the workings of the over-universe. This intentionality was trying to thwart me, and felt connected to the slippery fish idea. His new tactic was to interfere with my senses, to the point that whichever one I was trying to use stopped working correctly. When I tried to type, I had greater awareness of what was on the screen. When I looked at the screen, I gained insight into the music. When I listened, I was able to type. It felt different somehow than just simple lack of coordination. I had the sense that someone was doing it on purpose just to frustrate me. I then understood that in order to interact with my surroundings, the universes needed to be in their life-size form. This was why there was such a large ratio of chaos time to order time, because there was only a single point at which the universes were large, the point after inhaling but before exhaling. Of course, this meant that I could expand this point by holding my breath, which worked wonderfully. However, I then felt that thwarting intentionality manifests itself in a different way, by shooting lots of different thoughts at me at once, like a sailing ship blown off course by many otherwise unnoticeable gusts of wind. My train of thought was constantly bombarded with irrelevant things to get me off course. The longer I held my breath, the worse this bombardment became, until I was completely confused and forgot why I was holding my breath, exhaled, and returned to the chaos. Now the fractal universes took on another image, that of 2 fractal circles. The circles were empty in the middle and made up of fractals lined up next to each other in a curve. Thus they had fractals trailing off in infinitesimal smallness on the outside. These circles were next to each other and spinning in opposite directions. The point of real universes became the interface of the fractals in between the 2 circles, which only meshed up correctly in the very center. The void then was represented by the fractal parts on opposite sides of the circles that never interfaced at all. Again, I had the overwhelming notion that the universes were constantly expanding and collapsing, linked to my breathing. but I was unable to figure out the intent of this new circular formation, and it soon reverted to the main fractal field. The next universe analogy seemed to have progressed into a new point. I saw the universe as a sine wave, with void at the bottom and existence at the top, and understood that what we experience somehow spans the crest of the waves. The universe now seemed to be still image slices of the over-universe, each one corresponding to a certain instant in time. They all come and go, but we manage to persist as one crest falls and the next crest swells up to meet us. It took me a few minutes to realize this, and as soon as I did, I was back to the fractal field. I then had the idea that I must be experiencing what it feels like to be God, seeing all of everything there is going through its natural cycles. By now at about T plus 1 hour and 20 minutes, I definitely felt past the peak. I no longer found it necessary to hold my breath in order to interact with the world, and found that the analogies I was using to integrate the experience seemed to be my own rather than being presented to me. The last analogy of the universes was similar to the sine wave analogy, only this time I saw it as a sine wave mirrored in the center, so instead of a rising and falling line, there were two lines rising and falling opposite each other. The point in the center where the space between the waves was greatest was the point of existence, and the point where they crossed was the void. These waves began whizzing past at such a speed that the existence point seemed to create a static image like light spinning on a fan blade. Somehow then the points of existence persist just long enough for the next point to occur and take its place. Throughout the whole trip I was feeling a very strong idea of being presented something that I was intended to look at, that the concept behind it was straining to be freed upon my mind. Once I felt I sufficiently grasped the concept, I then felt an urge to share with as many others as I possibly could. I also felt like the presentations were shifting through as many different analogies as possible, as if the presenter was trying desperately to find something I could comprehend. I didn't feel that the presenter was God, so to speak, or an alien or anything like that. It was just an unnamed force that had intentions, almost as if the idea itself were alive, and it wanted to be thought by as many people as possible. Curiously enough, there was some thwarting force at work too, trying to prevent me from freeing the idea from its bonds by grasping it enough to think and pass on. All in all, this was a very insightful experience and had very few unpleasant effects. The chaos at the beginning was very annoying. It felt like I was spinning around so fast that I was unable to grasp anything enough to make sense of what was going on. This wasn't so much scary as it was frustrating, but it fortunately did not last long. It served mainly to shake me up enough to pay attention to the rest of the things I was presented with. I imagine I took around 75 to 90 milligrams of the substance, and while I will probably experiment with a bit higher dose just to see what happens, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the optimal dosage level. The peak lasted around 1 hour and 20 minutes, and by 2 hours I was fully back to this world, though still noticeably intoxicated. Interesting to me were the after effects, in which I felt compelled to comfort people, almost as if there was nothing any more pleasing to me than to make other people happier in life. DPT is certainly a very powerful chemical, and is not to be lightly handled. I can see how it could spiral into a very unpleasant experience. To the right person, though, it would be a wonderful journey of understanding and insight. I just want to do a commentary on this one real quick, and I just think, like, you can either see things in a pessimistic way or an optimistic way. And, like, when you see these universal analogies, like with the 3 rods, where the center rod is contracting and then expanding in repeated patterns, just making the string more taut and then loosening the string, it kind of feels like the way the universe deals with us in our lives, where we don't really, people say we have free will, but at the end of the fucking day, we really don't have free will to decide what the universe does with us. And I think that's like what a lot of this trip is showing, is that it's this presenter that's showing him that there are cycles to things that are unavoidable. And, you know, it's interesting that he uses fractals, because fractals have a component known to them as self-similarity. Self-similarity is a term that you'll see in statistical mechanics. And it basically means whether you zoom out or zoom into something, a fractal will look the same no matter how much you zoom in or out. Something that's not a fractal will look different. So self-similarity is you can it essentially looks similar no matter how many times you zoom in. Fractals are a really interesting concept in physics. They're a concept that, the butterfly effect is around, and they're supposed to be this embodiment of randomness, but we kind of learned that, there is really no randomness. There's, even in the extreme randomness of a fractal, he is seeing extreme order in how cyclical everything is. When I took nonlinear dynamics, I just learned that there really is no randomness. Like, if you have enough variables, you'll be able to see things go in cycles. You'll be able to see any process go in cycles. It doesn't matter what it is. And that's the thing about physics, is that everything is ubiquitous, meaning the concepts are translatable from one field to another. So what you learn in classical mechanics, you can use for optics, and what you learn in optics, you can use for thermodynamics, etc, etc, etc. Even quantum mechanics is developed from classical mechanics, and you see nothing but classical mechanics in quantum mechanics. It's just a bunch of smart guys using imaginary numbers to make the Schrodinger equation, or use the Dirac equation to some new way to explain how subatomic particles move around in an orbital. But I just think that this was a really profound trip. I read this trip a lot, and I hated reading this fucking thing, because it's not like the Jedi Mind Tricks trip report I was reading, where that's an emotional experience. The guys bring me along for a journey, and this trip is just it's mathematical, and it's dull. It's not easy to deliver. But yeah, I want to make a commentary on this, because there was just some really interesting concepts in it. Another thing that really caught my attention is how there is an over universe where it contains the set of everything there is. And, it wouldn't surprise me if this universe is just one out of infinite. You know what I'm saying? Just like there's basically an infinite amount of atoms in the universe. Whether you go down in the micro scale or up in the macro scale, there's just infinite in each direction. So I feel like this trip report reveals a lot of truth about how this universe really works and how this world really works. Dude, I'm telling you, when I see people in life, they don't decide the track they're on. They don't decide the trajectory they're launched on. Everything is basically decided from the environment you're placed in. And that's one thing I figured out is everything is fucking decided from the initial conditions. Where people are launched off from. And I totally fucking understand that now. It's just these people just believing yeah, we have so much free will, and there's dude, there's just so little wiggle room. How the fuck do you have free will in a hyperinflated fucking economy? You know what I'm saying? We're literally the unit, at least the US over here, the US is getting hyperinflation is getting to the point where it's Germany after World War I, where the mark gets hyperinflated, and it just becomes it just becomes worthless. And it's dude, we're just entering that cycle in life right now. This world is society is entering this cycle in life right now, where people are just decaying. You're seeing decay in a normal fucking world. Even in nature, you don't see people, with extreme mental illnesses, homeless people. You don't see even animals with extreme fucking no opportunity in life, no opportunity to get better, no opportunity to have their mind right again. There's just some people who are screwed, and it's we gotta be careful to not end up in a worse place. One thing I'm sick of is too many people will always say oh, you can always have it worse. And it's where the fuck can I find someone that can actually say to someone else, it can always be better? when was the fucking last time you heard that from someone? You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, man, like this trip really, like, it got me thinking about a lot of things, and, I'd like to see what you guys got from it. I hope you enjoyed the Ferry Corsten trance song at the beginning. I forget what it's called. It's like Big Deep Blue or something, but yeah, Ferry Corsten was a really interesting one, and I also decided to add Milkdrop. He mentioned Milkdrop in this trip report, and what you see in the background is Milkdrop. So basically it's a music visualizer, and you can't download it anymore. It's like, it's just funny because like Milkdrop that was made in like the early 2000s, and it's infinitely more advanced than any other music visualizer they make today. Because the guy who made it, he created like some sort of mathematical algorithm for it to program it that like only a genius could really make. But it's like it's an outdated program that can only run on like Windows or something like that. There wasn't anything else that really caught my attention. I would just say that when it comes to like doing DPT, I've never personally done DPT. I've never touched DMT, salvia, DPT, or datura. Just those things that take you completely out of body. I mean, I know mushrooms is considered a tryptamine, but it's not really the same level as DMT. Like, and everyone's brain reacts differently to mushrooms. I mean, when you start getting up into the higher doses of mushrooms, it can get really extreme, really intense. And yeah, I mean, you can have an out-of-body experience, but, I think the way my brain reacted to mushrooms, I couldn't really, see anything or like go out of body because I had already went through 3 years of schizoaffective disorder. So I was literally tripping sober for 3 years every fucking day with schizoaffective, but it was like a bad trip, where it's like you have bad thoughts, just negative trauma, like all this bullshit in your head all the time. But I healed from schizoaffective. I went from full-blown, they call it schizoaffective, but it's really fucking schizophrenia. These stupid-ass psychologists want to just give it another fucking name. It's like, oh, there's like one slight difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective, and it's like, you wake up at 7 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. It's like, shut the fuck up. It's the same shit, and it's like, I actually healed from it. And like one of the things I want to do with this channel is like actually help people, understand the brain better, understand chemical structures, understand neurochemistry better. And I also want to learn about it too, because my specialty is physics, but like I'm almost, physics is relatable to everything, but I'm almost more interested in neurochemistry than physics. I'm really interested to hear what more of these trip reports have to say, and I think there's so much to be gleaned from them. And even if you want to go into how you can analyze it in a statistical way, there's plenty of elements from these that you can actually infer certain ideas from to be actually something that people could seriously research and seriously pinpoint in a laboratory setting, or even with these substances with certain parameters. So there's a lot of interesting things to look at. But yeah, that concludes my trip report, and I hope you guys have a good one. You take it easy.